started off making temporary prosthetics for people who had major injuries or car accidents, and then I moved into making monsters for YTV, and then I moved into producing. I lived overseas for a few years. When I came back, as a form of survival, I went back to school and ended up in a theater program. I'd always been behind the camera. I was watching on the tiny monitor. You know what, the first time I got a part, I went into my professor's office and I started crying. I was like, oh, I'm gonna do this. And she said, just picture the story and tell the story. The only way I could really picture the story was like, how did each segment relate to my own life? And, you know, I was going through a really long process of divorce it was dealing with abuse, and it was also dealing with mobility. And I was playing a character who was 100 years old, and each night I would say, just let go. And I was able to let go, and it prepared me for the fight I was about to endure.
I was raised up believing I was somehow unique, like a snowflake, distinct among snowflakes, unique in each way.
So in the divorce, I was fighting for mobility. My mother had had a stroke. All of a sudden it became up for question whether or not I could take my daughter to go and see my mother in the islands when what we thought was going to be the last few weeks of her life. Fortunately, she survived, but I was appalled by that. Like, how is it that I'm being questioned on whether or not, like, because when you have mobility, it's a question of whether or not you're going to return with the child. And so for a year, I wasn't allowed to leave Canada at all without permission. I wasn't even allowed to leave the province. At first, it was about my mother and my daughter. And then as I met more and more women, it became about, well, if I can win this case, then all these women will have a case to be able to travel and see their families. And so I made this decision, like, I'm going to fight this. And mobility is such a huge question in Canada. And I was asking not to just move into another city or a province, but I was asking to move a 17-hour flight away. So being in school and being in women's studies, being in theater, doing a minor in Indigenous studies, they gave me a really good understanding of what my rights and what the laws were and why they should be opposed. And I ended up winning the largest mobility case in Canada at the time. But like in that time, we had support taken out. I ended up homeless for a year. It was 4 years in court. I lost everything that I had built in my 20s. And my mother was also a big part of all of that. And she'd come to visit me and she was crying in her room. I'm like, oh my God, what's wrong? What do I need to do? And she said, maybe I don't tell you I love you enough, but I love you. But what you have in this marriage isn't love, and I'm begging you, pack the child and leave it all behind and just come home. And that's exactly what I did, I packed up my daughter and left. And I didn't really want to move away. I just didn't want somebody saying where my life had to be. And particularly somebody that I was leaving, right? And then a year after that, my mother was killed and robbed, and like everything in her home, her bank account, everything was cleaned out. And I completely lost my voice. I couldn't speak. I dropped out of school, stopped talking to people, refused to celebrate holidays. I started seeing a grief counselor every other week, just so I could go somewhere safe and cry. In that same year, my daughter was attacked in school. In the summertime, they bring in a lot of Mexican and Jamaican farm laborers, and being dark-skinned, my daughter was under attack for also having dark skin, and started off as like light teasing that turned into 17 pages of virulently hateful and racialized and sexual text messages. And I'd come home and my daughter was like, I don't want to go to school anymore. And I read the messages and kind of felt weak in the knees. And I went in and I talked to the school and I said, this is what's happened, here are the messages, do something. And And then I waited for, I don't know, 5 or 6 weeks, nothing happened. And then I called the school again, nothing happened. So I went to this equity meeting in Hamilton, and they were trying to pass that gay education should also be part of sexual education so that we all learn how to accept difference. It wasn't necessarily dealing with my issue, so I'm just listening, and all of a sudden they opened up the floor for Q&A, and this huge line of people came up, and one person after another, and it was so hateful what they were saying, and I just felt myself like, and I got up, and I remember this man, he was like 6'5", he got up, he was like, "Don't listen to her, she loves the devil, she loves the devil." And I just turned to him and I said, "If you are the example of parentage, it's no wonder our kids are being attacked in schools." And all of a sudden the audience started applauding and cheering, and I realized there were all these parents in there that had been silenced by all these other parents. And then I got off the mic, and all of a sudden the teachers union came, and they surrounded me, and they like created 2 loops of people around me. And I was like, "What are you doing? What's going on?" They're like, just stay calm. And then the meeting closed, and all of a sudden there was like a gang load of people that came in trying to reach in at me and like, "You have no right to say that." And it fired me up. And I went back to the school, and now I'm mad, right? And this fire started building up inside of me. Being a single mother and being a student, I don't have anything to lose. So I don't have anything to lose to drag this through the mud. I said, "So you have a choice. Either I drag things through the mud, or you give me a morning with your students." And they're like, "Well, what are you going to do with our students?" I said, "I'm going to put on a play." And I brought my friend Una in from New York. She had this play called Recess that talked about all these things that these parents didn't want talked about. She talked about youth who were gay. She talked about AIDS. She talked about racial difference. She talked about poverty. So we put on the play at the school, and we handed out little questionnaires. At the school, 6 students handed in their essays. But we put on the play at the community theater, and 62 kids walked from the country, from their suburban homes, whatever, to come in and hand in their questionnaires like, "I'm being attacked. I hear this all the time. And it was overwhelming. Like, they didn't want to hand it into school, but they wanted to come in to this theater to, 2 women they didn't know, to say, "This is happening. Please don't tell anybody I'm giving you this." And so I collected all of that information, and I put it back to the school, and they started changing things. And it made me think that, you can give anybody all the theory you want. And intellectually we can digest it and understand it, but if you don't affect people viscerally, they don't feel why they need to change, right? If you have the courage to speak, if you can begin with that, right? Because more people are afraid of speaking in public than they are of death, right? So if you can overcome that fear, you can overcome anything. Like, our lives are important, and by telling the truth and having the courage to get up there and tell the truth and say the things that you think are impolite or unbearable to say, they're healing, and your life is important. I don't think I'm ever going to not be a student of love, but I think that it's a worthy education.